welcome to the Ask PCH Mentoring Skills Peer Support webinar. I'm Kat and I support the Mentoring Support Programme at the college. Today's webinar will be facilitated by Matt Driver, who also facilitates our Mentoring Skills courses here at the college. Sarah Fellows is also on the line, and Sarah is the Mentoring Programme Lead at the college.
Kat, I know we were talking a few days ago about some issues that had come up that a few people had said that they'd had some kind of questions about generally around mentoring. Do you have access to a couple of those questions that maybe we can start to have a talk about?
Yeah, I've got some here. So we had a couple of questions come in, one of which was about a mentee growing reliant on their mentor for kind of answers to their problems, and if there were any approaches they could take around this.
Matt, do you have any experience of that?
Well, it's certainly one of the challenges that some mentors can face, is that people become very reliant on them. And I guess that just from experience, it seems to work best if at the beginning, when the whole relationship is contracted, that there is an agreement about specifically how long that's going to last, and whether it's a few months or maybe a year or whatever. And that on the whole, it seems to be best if you do finish at that point. So if somebody wanted further mentoring after that, then maybe it would be good to either change mentor, or maybe there should be at least a gap of a few months before it's picked up again. It could also be that the mentor is getting a bit over, what's the right word, feeling overly responsible for the mentee. And one of our principles really is that the primary role of the mentor is to facilitate someone's thinking, to help them through their thinking, not to rescue them, to sort them out, to be a crutch, if you like. That we've stressed in our workshops that the essence of the relationship is one of partnership and equality before everything else. Not necessarily equality in the hierarchical sense, but as colleagues, as people. So there could be something that the mentor needs to think about, in terms of their own approach and their own thinking as they go into the mentoring. One more thing is that it could be very useful for the mentor to have somebody else, like in a supervisory or peer mentor role, with whom they can talk about that kind of issue and just try and work out what it is that's getting them stuck there, or what it is that's hooking the other person in, and maybe finding ways to disconnect that.
Thank you, Matt. On a similar vein, we had somebody who spoke about having good coaching sessions, but often feeling burdened by the conversations and kind of having a weight on their shoulders. Is there anything that you could say about that? Yeah,
well, you're right. It is a bit similar, I think, really. For me, it usually means one of two things: either that the mentor is trying to mentor when there isn't really a mentoring agenda. So maybe where the mentee is not really up for it, or is resisting the actual process of mentoring, and maybe the mentee really needs training, or maybe they've been sometimes told to come or encouraged very strongly by a senior figure to come, and actually they don't really want to. And so what happens is the mentor finds themselves doing all the work and putting all the energy into things, and it doesn't generally go so well. So the danger is the mentor ends up feeling bad about it, feeling like they've done a bad job. The other thing, a couple more things. One is actually to say, make sure that you do the contracting really clearly at the beginning. So to make sure you find out what's brought them to mentoring, you find out that you check that they really do want it, what are the broad topic areas, and so on. And that you do in the contracting, you do talk about challenge, and say, I will challenge you at times. How much challenge are you up for? and that you do as the mentor feel able to challenge someone for whatever it is. So if you're feeling that the conversation is not going anywhere, that you actually say that fairly, in a respectful but fairly direct way. So look, I just want to stop things a moment. I'm feeling that this isn't really going forward, or I'm getting the feeling that we're going a little bit round in circles here, and I'm wondering how you're experiencing this right now, or I'm wondering what's the real issue for you here, or what's the underlying issue here that we might need to talk about. So I think that's also true. And just the other thing to say is, as I said for the first question, that the mentor could really benefit from having a supervisor or a peer or a colleague with whom they can talk about these things and just work out what to do, sort of download a bit and work out what, if anything, they can learn from that.
Thanks, Matt. That's really useful.
Thanks, Matt.
Matt, you were talking about kind of the need for the supervision, particularly where just generally anyway, to support mentors' professional development, but also in situations where they feel they're getting challenged by or burdened by issues for their mentee. Is there a particular kind of frequency, or regular frequency, you think that mentors should be getting access to this supervisory supporters from other mentors or from a more senior mentor? Is there a minimum that you would recommend in your experience?
It's a bit hard to put down an exact minimum for supervision. In psychotherapy, they do fix it. So every X number of hours that you do as a therapist, you need to have your own supervision generally. I quite a few of the mentors and coaches that I work with would seek supervision kind of as and when they need it. So as and when they feel a bit burdened, or that things aren't going quite well, or they're getting a bit hooked and so on. I think it would be very good. Well, I think it would be essential really to have one or two people who you could call pretty much any time and have a chat with about these issues. One of the other things that works very well is to have group mentoring / supervision sessions. So that group might meet once a month, maybe virtually on Skype or whatever, or face to face if they can. And there would be a chance there for each person to have some time to talk about the challenges they face, or to really sort of bottom out the learning that they're drawing from their work as well. That's incredibly helpful as well. So there isn't a specific frequency, I wouldn't say, but I think it would be good. I mean, I think one of the things that might be worth doing is to know who your champion is, or who are the people that have kind of been doing this for a while, and so really know what mentoring is and have experience of it, because you do need somebody who understands what it is if you're going to get some supervision from them, not just anybody.
Thanks, Matt. I think it's also fair to say that in the absence of, so if somebody if they feel that they're working in isolation as a mentor and they're not sure if they have access to those networks, then Kat, they could always approach us, couldn't they, at the college?
Yeah, more than welcome to approach us. We have resources, and we have these webinars that are going to be regular, so you can kind of use these as your supervision, I suppose. Yeah.
And also, I think from Matt's point around the champions, we've got access to the mentoring champions who are spread throughout the UK. So they potentially can tap into larger groups of mentors as well, if people wanted to have that, if they want to look locally for their supervisory support and to support their professional development.
Matt, just kind of off the back of what you were talking about, we had a query come in around where you're working with a mentor who's stuck on a particular issue and you're finding it difficult to move on, and see any kind of growth in relation to that issue. Do you have any kind of practical advice around that?
So the person that you're mentoring seems to be stuck, or maybe going around in circles, or not getting anywhere. Is that have I got that? Is that
exactly that?
Well, this happens fairly often, to be honest. And again, it generally, in my experience, it generally means that we haven't quite got to the real issue. And this can be a point where the coach can get overly worried about, oh, I'm failing as a coach because I'm not getting there, or the mentor can be saying to themselves, I'm not doing a good job here. And actually, they might be doing a very good job, and the fact that you come up against this stuckness, if you like, might be a sign that actually you're doing quite well because you've actually hit the real issue. One of the things that's very helpful in, as it were, surfacing this is something which we cover on the advanced workshop, which we call feedback in the here and now, which is a technique used which comes from Gestalt therapy. I can hear some very loud typing on a keyboard. It's just slightly loud on the line here. So the idea of the feedback in the here and now is that the mentor would actually play back to the mentee exactly what they're noticing going on in that moment, perhaps about how their behavior is impacting them. And the traditional way this works is that there are three, I'm going to try and write these as I go, 3 simple sentences. The first one says, I'm noticing. And what you talk about there is what you're noticing behaviorally. So I notice that we're now talking about X, Y, Z for the 3rd time in this conversation, or I'm noticing we're now talking again about something we spoke about last time and the time before. The second one is to say, and the impact is, and then I say what the impact is mainly on myself, but also perhaps on the process. So so I'm noticing that we're speaking about this same thing for the 3rd time. The impact on me is that I'm feeling quite confused, or I'm feeling a bit frustrated right now, or something like that. So we say it in a respectful way, but we speak honestly about our feelings. What we don't say is you're being difficult, or you're obviously stuck, or we don't sort of diagnose them or judge them. We offer them that impact. And then the 3rd thing is we say, I'm wondering, and we wonder about whatever it is that they're talking about. I'm wondering, what's the real issue here for you? Or I'm wondering what else we need to talk about here. Or I'm wondering how you might be holding yourself back here. Whatever is genuinely whatever you are genuinely wondering here. So this is quite a useful technique where you sense that somebody is stuck. The other thing that is often a sign, or often going on here, is some kind of self-limiting belief, some kind of assumption that the person is holding, which is in a sense getting in the way of their thinking. And again, it's very useful to surface whatever it is that you're noticing and allow them to think about it and to think about, well, what is really going on? So you could even say sometimes, I'm wondering if there's something that I'm wondering what assumptions you're making here about this, or I'm wondering what you might be saying to yourself about yourself here, or what you might believe about yourself in relation to this issue. Something like this, but we basically bring it in to the conversation, again, in a very respectful manner, building on the rapport, which we spoke about on the first course. But we offer it honestly to the person without judgment and allow them to process it and to work with it. Again, if you wanted to do a little bit more on that, you could come, well, as and when we run an advanced workshop, you could come to that.
Thank you, Matt. I just wondered if you might like to just say a little bit about building rapport, because we did have a question about this where somebody had met with their mentor, gone through the initial contracting phase, but have found it a little bit of a struggle to build that rapport. Right.
Well, we probably need to know what was the nature of the struggle. Do you have any more information there? Or?
No, just that it feels there isn't that kind of mentoring relationship. It's not a comfortable place yet, and how long to continue on with that. before kind of not giving up, but thinking maybe we're not right as a mentoring relationship?
I think sometimes we just have to be honest with ourselves and say we're not probably able to mentor absolutely everybody, or we'd probably hope to be able to work with most people. But there are going to be occasions when we can't. Interestingly, I was working with somebody one-to-one this morning. This is true, actually, not long before this, and this person had a new client who they found incredibly difficult. And they said to me that I don't really want to actually work with that person, actually. And it's it's partly the person's attitude and so on. But we were talking about it, and we were saying, well, actually, there's no law that says you have to. You don't have to. We say this is a relationship of mutuality, of collaboration, of respect. And if you don't think that's going to work, then it's actually a good idea to suggest maybe that you help them find somebody else to work with them. That's the bottom line. Anyway, my sense often in this situation, though, is that probably the mentor is being a bit too polite, and they need to contract a bit more candidly and a bit more honestly, and ask the person, what exactly do you want from this mentoring? What's brought you here? What do you actually want from this? How prepared are you to work on this? Or indeed, if they're talking about something but they don't seem very energetic, you might say, well, tell me how important this is to you on a scale of 1 to 10. So do one of those kind of, I forget what they call it in medicine, but where you ask them to give a score between 1 and 10. I think that's a very useful thing to do. I think it's really to talk about it. So whenever you feel it's not working, don't carry on regardless. Stop the process and talk about what's going on right now. So if you think they're stuck, stop the process, talk about being stuck. If you're not feeling the rapport's working, stop the process and say, I'm not really feeling a great rapport at the moment. I'm wondering how you're feeling. Or I'm not feeling this is kind of really moving forward. I'm wondering how you're feeling. Something like that. So if you feel stuck, if it's not going right, pause. Don't keep on, just plowing through that T-GROW model or whatever. Pause and talk about what's actually going on right now.
Thank you, Matt. Just
Okay.
on the back of that, do you think it's worth in the initial contracting phase and kind of in any contracting paperwork that it's kind of explicitly stated that it's completely fine for either party to say, I don't think this is working, and just kind of highlight that at that stage, so the mentor and the mentee are comfortable to say that?
I think it's worth saying somewhere in the documentation. Yeah, you might just want to think about how you put it, but yes, I think that's fair enough. I know of one or two other schemes that I've worked on within the clinical world, let's say. They have a sort of what do they call it? Either party can withdraw and they don't have to give a reason. And it actually doesn't happen very often, but what I've seen is it gives the mentors a bit of confidence that actually they don't just have to plow on regardless, if it's not working. Yeah, I think it would be a good idea. If it's not in there already, we could probably find wordings from elsewhere that you could version for yourselves for the Royal College.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Sarah.
It's just listening to Matt made me think of somebody that I was mentoring, and we had initially I had exactly that thought that the rapport wasn't there. And was it something that was worth continuing with? Did my mentee want to continue? And actually, after a couple of sessions, I realised that it was purely a personality thing. We had very different personalities, but we actually recognised that the mentee felt that she was still able to get quite a lot out of the mentoring relationship. So I think there is, if it doesn't necessarily work immediately, you don't get that necessary rapport straight away, but providing there is trust and that the mentee feels that they're benefiting the relationship, you as a mentor might be over analysing and over questioning if the rapport is there, but if the mentee is happy to continue and does feel that they're making progress, then I think it's just accepting it just might take longer.
Yeah.
To feel that you're working well properly with your mentee.
Yeah. And if I could add, it's important to be careful not to over-interpret what you see. You know what I mean? Because I have somebody I'm working with at the moment who lives in another country, and their English is we're working in English, and it's not their first language. So I asked this person what I think is a really good question, and they go, "Look," and then they answer. And when they say "look," they sound angry to me or cross, or like I think, oh, I must have asked a really stupid question. But what they really mean is, well. Do you see what I mean? That's their way of saying, well, maybe. And actually, and I'm always wondering, is this guy, is he getting anything from this? And at the end, he always tells me that he's really enjoyed it, and it's been great. So I have to be very careful I don't overly interpret. In this case, I'm thinking of somebody I'm hearing them speak English, but with perhaps a different intonation and a different, the unspoken stuff is perhaps different from how it would be between two native speakers or two people from the same country. I don't know. But I just have to hold back my own judgments, which are also about myself sometimes.
And I guess that's also adding an extra complexity to the challenge of building rapport if you're mentoring remotely, so you never necessarily see each other face to face. You're obviously not necessarily picking up on visual cues either. Yeah.
This case, it's on Skype for business, so we see each other's faces
okay.
on sort of shoulders. So that's pretty good on the whole. But yes, but again, you don't see the whole thing, and if you're on the phone, you see less as well. But I've still found, personally, I found both of these really effective. I find that when I'm on the phone, I listen more intensely, and I, sometimes I have to close my eyes to really focus. But I still feel we can build rapport and so on. So phone coaching is used a lot in, or let's say remote coaching is used a lot now around in international organizations, in places like the States, which is in Russia, which are such huge countries, it's much harder to get together physically, So it makes it actually much easier to have sessions. I think, to be honest, at the moment, 2/3 of my coaching is remote, probably.
Oh, right, okay.
My coaching / mentoring, whatever, the one-to-ones, let's call them, are remote, probably.
So we've had a question come in. I'm going to read it as it is, and I have spoken to Marion just to clarify a little bit. So Marion's asking, have you involved other team members, for example, if communication issues are of concern involving nursing colleagues? So I'm thinking that might be around at what point you might bring another party into the mentoring relationship, but I have messaged Marion just for a little bit of clarification.
Well, it's an interesting question. I would say personally that if you have a sense or a hunch that something like that would be useful, then I would say, well, suggest it and see. And if your mentee agrees, then just work out how it's going to be done in the right way. And it might be very useful. Occasionally, when I'm working with the client, I do something like a 360-degree feedback. So we might have a questionnaire we send to their seniors, their peers, and their juniors, or even clients or customers or patients if they wanted. And we get a kind of 360-degree set of feedback about them, which we then discuss in the session. So that's one possibility. Occasionally, myself and other colleagues have done a kind of pair mentoring where we've worked with two people who have to work more effectively together, or who maybe have started in new roles or whatever. We've worked with like a chief executive and a chair, for example, who have to work together. So I would think that could work very well if all the parties are willing to, say, facilitate a conversation or mentor a conversation between, say, a doctor and nurse, in confidence, though, between the three of you. That might be very effective. The other thing that we do fairly often is that if someone is coming to me for mentoring or coaching, I might have a conversation with their boss as well, or a sponsoring figure. Usually boss, could be an HR person. And the three of us talk through what are the main issues that the organization is wanting this person to work on. And then we go away and we do one-to-one, and the contents remain confidential, but we have at least triangulated, if you like, what are we trying to achieve here. Then it's up to the mentee to actually follow that or not, because they may have other things they want to talk about too. But again, I found that very helpful, because very often in the workplace, I'm thinking particularly the mentee, if they want to make some changes or some shifts, then they've got to go back and be able to do those in the workplace. So it's always much better if their manager is actually going to back them on that. So I would say, on the whole, it could be a very good idea, but it needs to be done in the right way and with agreement of everybody.
Thank you, Matt. To a follow-up from Marion,
Yeah.
they work in a DGH and have allocated senior nurses to their trainees, and particularly with trainees who have issues with teamwork and communication. And
Right.
Marion notes that that's worked very well. So
Yeah.
it does seem to be around the teamwork and the communication where there's the cross working.
Yeah. Yeah. Are the people they're allocated to, like, in kind of line management roles, or are they like, you know, I could like, if you were my manager, I might have a different manager as my mentor, for example, which might be good, because I could speak more freely to them than I might be able to my own manager, and kind of work through what I can do to improve the relationship, for example. That could be very useful.
And certainly within a training. Oh, sorry, Kat.
Sorry, go on, Sarah.
I was just going to add, certainly within with a training environment, it's really interesting. I'd not heard of this, but a trainee, kind of the equivalent of a line manager for a paediatric trainee would be like their clinical supervisor, their educational supervisor, a senior doctor. The idea of pairing them with an experienced nurse to support them with their communication skills, I think is really really interesting, really interesting, and sounds like it's been a very positive solution.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah,
I just wanted to say, Kat, as a reminder to other people who are maybe not able to get onto the audio, other attendees on this webinar, if they do want to send the questions in through the questions tab, like Marion's done, they're welcome to do that if they're not able to be able to speak on the webinar today. Do send them through, and we'll take them as they come in. Sorry, Matt, I interrupted you.
Right.
So we had. Oh, sorry, Matt. Go on.
Well, no, I was only going to say that these kind of things, like communication difficulties and so on, they're much better dealt with soon and early on, aren't they, than if they're allowed to carry on for years and years, because then it becomes harder to shift, which I think is why some of the interpersonal skills training is featuring more in clinical medical school training and so on, more than it used to.
And certainly within the paediatric training program, trainees are encouraged to do what you call 360-degree feedback regularly, so that they get feedback from their peers, from their seniors, from non-medics, to give them a rounded picture. And ideally, I think they're encouraged to discuss any things that are flagged up in their feedback with the educational supervisor, or with a mentor if they want to discuss it with a mentor, to support their development in those areas.
Yeah, that's great. I think, oh yes, it was one thing I was just going to mention, is because I know it's one of your guidelines, I think, at the Royal College, that actually it's also, your clinical supervisor can't really be your mentor. It's a little bit tricky, because it can start to confuse the issue, although the supervisor can use mentoring skills and approaches. But if you really want a mentor with whom you can have independent, confidential conversations, then it's generally not going to be someone with formal responsibility for you.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we've always flagged up that ideally your educational and clinical supervisor wouldn't necessarily be also be your mentor, although as you've said, there's educational supervisors, clinical supervisors would be very it would be very useful for them to use mentoring skills and techniques.
Yeah.
But I think the idea is that as mentoring is very much it's a mentee-led process. It's what the mentee wants to get out of it. It's their agenda. It's what they want to bring to the table.
Yeah.
It's very much an optional choice for them if they want to be mentored or not. Whereas obviously they have to have educational supervisors and clinical supervisors, and those individuals have a role around assessing of the individual trainee, as opposed to the completely independent agenda of the mentee. So that's why we kind of flag that. It's not that they can't be their mentor, it's that it may not be right for them to be their mentor.
Yeah. Thank you.
Have we had any more questions come in, Kat?
So we haven't had any live questions come in, but I've got one that was sent through via email, and it was around when you feel a mentee needs kind of more specialist support than is in your role as a mentor to provide. The kind of how to work around that, any steps to take.
I had a very good guideline given to me by a colleague once, which was, when you think you're out of your depth, then you are. And in the sense of, when this is outside of my professional role here and my capability. And so occasionally, I guess from my experience, the things that I've experienced where I felt I had to refer someone somewhere else were things like very severe stress, where I thought somebody was unwell. And I said to them, look, I don't think we can carry on with a mentoring conversation here. I'd like to suggest you see your GP as soon as possible. A couple of times, or no, several times, I've suggested to my mentees that they actually consider psychotherapy for underlying and what seem to be underlying issues that they face as well. They're probably the most common things. I know colleagues who have had, if you like, clients who, for example, are drinking too much, or and again, they're quite delicate, but they've encouraged them to seek specialized help as well, or people where they come for a mentoring session, but actually one of the things they're facing is perhaps a relationship breakdown at home. And again, the mentor isn't there to be a relationship counselor, but it might be very good to, to really strongly suggest that person seeks skilled advice or skilled support through that particular process as well, or financial troubles as well. That's another one that occasionally comes up as well. So these are all things that certainly a lot of doctors encounter in their patients, I know. And I think really for me, the principles would be much as they would be for yourselves as medical professionals, that when it's beyond your specific remit, then you refer them. But in this case, I would, sometimes I found that the person can carry on with mentoring and get some support elsewhere, if that makes sense. So occasionally someone is able to continue psychotherapy. Maybe they're looking at some sort of trauma from their childhood, but they're finding the mentoring also very helpful to actually just cope with today. As long as it's well contracted and everybody knows the situation and is clear what their roles are, then it can work very well.
That's really useful. I
thanks.
think it's probably also worth flagging up that the college has kind of a resources page on its website, so it's not just for people that are mentoring, but for anybody. But certainly, if mentors feel that they are their mentee needs some support, then we've got a site that signposts to various websites that can provide paediatricians with links to health, wellbeing and other referral sites. So it's called Where to Go for Help and Support the Doctor's Wellbeing. And there's just a large number of useful resources, useful websites, useful support organisations that people can be signposted to if they need to and they're not aware of them already.
Yeah, that's a really useful resource. Yeah, I think all the mentors ought to carry it around with them, really, or have it somewhere easily available. It doesn't happen often, but it gives you confidence, I think, to have something like that behind you. Yeah,
I think, as you say, it's really important that the mentor realises it's not their job to fix the person. It's not their job to solve these issues, and it's absolutely acceptable and essential that they signpost on to other resources and other support organisations.
Yeah. Again, I think there, you've also got the sounding boards to talk about these things. If you're concerned about one of your mentees, you could speak to someone at the college, or you could speak to your champions as well, just to clarify your own thinking about what you do and how you say it, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we haven't had any further questions coming from the people that are with us today. If anybody does want to send some questions in, please send them in now, but you can always send questions to mentoring@rcpch.ac.uk, and we can help you or route them through to Matt, who is very kindly always around to help. Do you want to add anything further, Matt?
I think it's just perhaps reflecting on some of the questions from today. A lot of it for me comes back to us as mentors just being real, being for real. So if it's not going anywhere, be for real and talk about that. If you feel that the relationship's not working, be for real and talk about it, and so on. So don't sort of plow on and try and complete a T grow process or something if you realize it's all stuck, because otherwise you're just kind of role playing at that point. So for me, it's just about saying honestly what you're experiencing. Sometimes is actually incredibly powerful.
It's really useful. I suppose it's also, not to add to what Matt's just said, but just Kat, to flag up that obviously if people didn't have particularly burning issues today, but they may crop up over time, we've got further peer support webinars, haven't we, coming up?
We've got those coming up. Let me get them up. So the next one's on the 18th of December, followed by the 30th of April and the 3rd of September 2019. And you can register for those at the link there. And then we have our courses coming up on the 6th of November in London, the 26th of March in Cardiff, and the 18th of June in London. And you can register for those at the link there, all on the RCPCH website. And as I mentioned, if you have any questions in the meantime, do send them to mentoring@rcpch. And you may be interested to also, if you're a practicing mentor, joining the Champions Network, so that you can kind of have that added peer support that Matt and Sarah mentioned earlier today. So after this webinar, you will receive an email regarding feedback for today's webinar. So once you receive that, we'd love to hear your thoughts. So please do let us know your feedback. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Speak to you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.